She had been screaming into the empty heat long before anyone heard her. Her voice was ragged, torn by thirst and fear, cracking under the weight of the sun like the desert itself wanted to swallow her cries. Maggie Doyle hung twisted on that wooden frame in the middle of the Lincoln prairie, one leg pulled high by a cruel rope that dug so deep it felt welded to her bone. Her dress was torn at the hem and split along the thigh, the hot wind whipping dirt into her raw skin. She tried again to tug the fabric down with her bound wrist, but all she managed was to scrape more splinters into her arms. Every breath seemed to make her shame burn hotter. The pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the fear that she would die here and no one would ever see her as anything except a broken, discarded body left for vultures. She whispered for help even though she knew the prairie had no mercy. Prescott's men had tied her up, laughed in her face, and rode off with a promise dripping poison. "The heat'll make you confess," they'd said. But she had nothing to confess, only a truth she feared would die with her if no one heard it. A shadow finally stirred on the horizon. A rider. Slow, cautious. Dust rolled behind hooves like smoke off a dying fire. Maggie's stomach knotted. She prayed it wasn't one of Prescott's men returning to finish what they'd started. She didn't have a scream left to fight with. The rider stopped beside her. Under the brim of a worn hat were a pair of tired blue eyes, a man who looked like he'd ridden farther than hope could reach. Jacob Hale didn't speak at first. He simply stared, stunned by what he saw, a woman suspended in the burning wind, limbs shaking, dress torn, dignity left hanging as bare as her skin. Then his gaze dropped before he could stop it. Just for a heartbeat. But long enough to fall into the place she wanted hidden more than anything. A burning flash of shame tore through her. "Don't look there," she cried, voice ripping out of her throat. Jacob jerked his head away at once. Guilt flushed across his face. But he couldn't unsee the bruises on her legs or that burned mark no human should carry. He couldn't pretend this was anything but the work of a monster. Would he ride away like the others had? Or would he risk everything for a woman he was never supposed to see? Jacob didn't leave. Not after hearing the tremble in her voice. Not after seeing how the ropes bit into her skin. He stepped closer, slow, palms lifted to show he meant no harm. Maggie twisted away on instinct, but the ropes held her tight. She squeezed her legs together like she could hide herself from the sun, the wind, and him. "Ma'am," Jacob said, voice low and rough, "I ain't here to stare. I'm here because you look like you're dying." He circled the wooden frame, checking each knot. When his fingers touched the rope, he cursed under his breath, a small sound, but full of anger. Prescott style. Knots tied not just to hold, but to cut. Maggie flinched when she heard that name. Jacob leaned in and spoke quietly. "If he did this, he meant to break more than your bones." Tears welled and slipped across her dusty cheek. He touched her ankle lightly, testing circulation. She jerked again. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm just making sure you can feel your foot." "I can feel everything," she whispered. "And I wish I couldn't." Their eyes met then, the first real look, without fear blocking the space between them. Jacob saw the truth. She wasn't wicked. She wasn't guilty. She was simply a woman the world had tried to crush. He took a breath and made his choice. "All right," he said. "I'm getting you down." But before he could cut the ropes, the sound hit them, hoofbeats, fast and mean. Prescott's men returning. Maggie's heart turned to ice. Would Jacob stand his ground? Or would he abandon her now that danger had teeth? Jacob didn't think. Instinct took over. He stepped in close, so close she felt the heat from his chest against her side. "Hold on," he whispered, though she had nothing to hold on to. His knife flashed. The rope at her wrist snapped. Pain surged down her arms, needles of fire as blood rushed back. She bit her lip hard enough to taste metal. He cut the rope on her leg and caught her as she sagged, her dress slipping again. "Don't look there," she gasped. He didn't. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her hips in one rough, protective motion. Two riders slid to a stop, dust spraying. "Well now," sneered the skinny one, teeth crooked as fence nails. "Boss said leave her till sundown." "What are you doing, Hale?" Jacob stood tall, keeping Maggie behind him. "I'm changing the schedule." The second man, reeking of whiskey, spat. "Thought a former soldier like you knew how to follow orders." "That's why I quit," Jacob said flatly. The first man swung off his horse, hand hovering over his gun. "Step away from the girl." Jacob moved first. Not as fast as a young man, but fast enough. His fist cracked against the man's jaw. Pain shot up his arm, but he didn't stop. The second man swung, catching Jacob across the nose. Blood ran instantly. The drunk one went for his revolver. Jacob grabbed his wrist, but an old scar under his ribs screamed with pain. The man elbowed him hard, and Jacob staggered. The gun clattered at Maggie's feet. Her hands shook. Her breath trembled. But she picked it up, two-handed, and fired into the sky. The shot cracked across the prairie like a thunderbolt. Both men jumped back. "You want to try that again?" she shouted. "Next time, I won't miss." Fear washed the whiskey bravado clean off their faces. They backed up, muttering, and rode away fast. Jacob wiped the blood from his nose. "Can you sit a horse?" "I'll fall," she whispered. "I'll catch you." He lifted her into the saddle and climbed up behind her, one arm firm around her waist. The horse surged forward, heading toward the Capitan Hills. Maggie's world tilted, the wind blurry, the sun too bright. She felt his heartbeat against her back, steady and grounding. She tried to stay awake, but darkness swept in like a tide. By the time they reached shelter, she was burning with fever. Jacob cared for her through the night, cooling her skin with creek water, whispering comfort each time her nightmares clawed through her sleep. "Don't look there," she mumbled once. "I'm not," he answered softly. "I'm keeping you here." By sunrise, she was clear-eyed but weak. When he examined her injured leg, she flinched. "Not there. For you, not me." Only when she nodded did he lower his gaze. The brand was swollen and angry. "That man should be in chains," he muttered. "That man owns half the cattle in Lincoln," she said bitterly. "And the law eats supper at his table." She told him everything. The extra cattle, the falsified counts, the moment she questioned the numbers and Prescott decided she saw too much. "He made sure the only thing people talked about was my shame," she said. "Not his theft." Jacob cleaned her wound, careful and gentle. "You didn't have to come back for me," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said. "But I saw what he carved into you. If I ride away from that, I'm no better than him." He took her to Cal Turner's ranch. An old soldier with scars in places nobody talked about. Cal gathered more men who'd stood against worse odds. They sent a telegram to Fort Stanton. Hired a photographer. Took proof. Maggie stood strong for the camera, her bruises, her brand, her truth. Days later, they rode back into Lincoln. Prescott strutted out, calling Jacob a fool and Maggie a liar. So Maggie stepped forward and said the hardest words of her life. "You told them not to look at me. Because if they ever did, they'd see what you are." She revealed the mark. Silence ripped through the crowd. An officer from Fort Stanton arrived with warrants in hand. By week's end, Prescott was in irons. Later, Maggie stood on Jacob's porch, looking out over a field washed clean by evening light. "If you'd ridden away," she said softly, "I'd have died thinking I was nothing but that mark." Jacob shook his head. "You're not the brand, Maggie. You're the hand that holds the iron. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about bullets or cattle. It was about one question every person faces. When they tell you not to look, do you look away? Or do you look straight at the truth and stand your ground?